So good afternoon, Muhammad. It's really great to finally meet you. I know I've been trying to get hold of you for a while now, so I'm really happy that we can have this opportunity to speak and to talk about your time as a Jeppe oarsman, and just to talk around a few of the things that Jeppe Boats and Blades is doing. So yeah, I think as a start, just by way of introduction, why rowing? What got you to the sport in the first place?
Yeah, well, when I came to Jeppe, I started at Jeppe in 2010. And I remember in primary school, not very good at cricket, didn't really dig this whole swimming thing. I heard about it, but didn't seem like my bag of fish. And then there was tennis, there was a lot of the other sports. And then my brother was actually, the reason I chose rowing, because my brother told me, he's like, it's a good way to like get into shape and just like get fit generally. So he says, and it's something different. Because he rowed, I think, for like half a season in grade 9. And I think we went a regatta, might have been Gauteng champs, might not have been. But my first memory of rowing is waking up at like 5:30 to drive to this regatta and going, I will never, ever do this sport. And then in like grade 8, I was like, why not? Something else. And then I went to the camp, the bug bit, and then I think I rowed flat out basically for like 4.5 years after that. I think the next time I took an extended like break from trying to train from rowing was after first eights.
Yeah,
That was
yeah.
like one of my longest breaks at school. But I think at school the whole time it was just all about rowing, going to training, and it was just something special because when I started, the club was like really small, so you knew absolutely everybody. If you were under 14 and you just arrived at camp, not really sure, you knew all the guys in the first 8. Some of them were prefects, and like it was lekker because when you went to school, then you kind of knew who was who. You knew a few people versus your mates who were coming in first day, didn't know anyone. So yeah, that was definitely a plus as well. That was also one of the reasons why I still think a lot of guys like rowing, is because that you go into that first day and you're ready, you have your sport, you have the guys that you know who didn't necessarily go to your primary school, and then you also know a few of the older guys. So that's also pretty cool. Especially
Absolutely.
when you coming from a tiny little primary school and now you like with all these giants.
Yeah, I think we all remember that sort of like scenario. You're coming in, you see these guys are 3 times your size.
Yeah.
In every proportion. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
So I mean, so Muhammad, I know that you're still very heavily involved with rowing at the moment. It would be good to know a bit about that. So, and I guess the question around it is, how has your time as a Jeppe oarsman sort of impacted on your adult life and what you currently do?
Yeah, so in terms of Jeppe rowing, I've told a few people who've asked me about this, like whenever they always ask me, like I remember when I started coaching in 2015 at St. Benedict, and one of the funniest things was the MIC used to always laugh at us. He says, you guys always say we, like you're still at Jeppe. And he's like, but you all work here. But one of the things about it was, I don't know what it was, but for me, as like I can honestly say, I don't think, like I can't imagine my life without Jeppe rowing, because I started rowing. I don't know what sport I would have done. I don't know to what extent I would have been involved at school. But like for me, rowing at school it just gave me a sport. That's kind of what I was known for doing. That's the guy who's nuts about rowing. And then I think of my mates from Joburg, the 3 guys who I'm closest friends with. Well, the 4 guys who I'm closest friends with, 3 of them are Jeppe boys. I know 2 of them mostly through rowing. The other guy was always in my class and lived like down the road, and he's best mates with one of the guys. And then we met the other guy at varsity. But yeah, and then when I went to St. Benedict's in 2015, when I was looking for my first coaching job, funnily enough, I actually applied to work at Jeppe, but the coaching was already full by then. So I ended up applying at St. Benedict's. And when I went to my interview, there was 2 of my ex-coaches from Jeppe who were already working there. So it was Brad Smith, who was the head of rowing when I started at Jeppe. He was the first 8 coach. And then Tato, who was my first 8 coach the year before, was coaching there as well. So when I walked into the interview, they basically said, we're just basically offering you the job and we want to know, like, will you take it? This is who you're going to coach. And a lot of that was just because they were like, I had good references from rowing at school, and then I coached and then in my second year of coaching, my second season, the guy that I ended up coaching with, who was like my main mentor in rowing coaching, Alan Page, he was also a Jeppe old boy. And then when I eventually left St. Benedict's, when I came to, so I got the job as the head of rowing here at SACS, where I currently am. One of the things that they told me, like, I remember being so blown away because they didn't actually phone St. Benedict's for my references. They phoned the headmaster here, Mr. Grant, knew Mr. Jackson. And Mr. Jackson, I think he taught me grade 10 or 11 business studies, but like we were his only class, so he knew all of us really well. And then he was actually my reference. They phoned him, and Mr. Jackson put in a good word for me. He said, "Yeah, he's a good guy. I'm sure he'll be fine." He went to Jeppe. He's definitely a good guy. So then,
for sure.
Yeah, I always say, Jeppe guys, we love a bit of jobs for the boys.
Tell you what, absolutely, old boys club, yeah, that's for sure.
Like I still remember, because one of the stories Mr. Jackson used to tell us was, he said his first ever job interview, he said he walked in and he had, I think it was his full colors tie, or his prefix tie on. And he said the guy looked at it straight away and he said, "Oh, you're a Jeppe old boy, you're in." And I always used to think about that when I was with. I always said that, like, yeah, once you leave school, that those things would be like huge. And then as soon as, like, for me, it was almost straight out the gate. Because even when I went to varsity, initially, we had, I think our matric class, I think 25 out of the 30 of us went to Wits. So we were all at university together for that first like year or so. And it was amazing because we were literally like 25 of us and we were all best mates. Like, we're not as close anymore, but those were my initial mates when I got to varsity. And even still now, most of my mates went to Jeppe. And if you ask my mates now, they say, like, I don't know what propaganda they feed you guys there, but no one goes harder for their school than Jeppe guys.
No, this is true, yeah. And so, I mean, and there's a lot of people that come into Jeppe and say exactly the same, you know. So once you're a Jeppe boy, you're always a Jeppe boy. That's what it boils down to, and it's so true. So I mean, it's really great that you're still involved with the sport and going from strength to strength, and that's amazing. Yeah. So one of these days we'll get you back to Jeppe. You know?
Yeah, maybe. I'm actually coming back this year. I'm leaving SACS at the end of this year to go back to Joburg.
Oh, really?
So maybe.
Okay.
Talk to Mr. Moore, ask him if he's got a bit of space.
There we go. Yeah, that sounds like a plan. Sounds like a plan. Yeah. So. Muhammad, I mean, you know a little bit about the Jeppe Boats and Blades initiative and the Jeppe rowing community. So, I mean, last year we managed to do quite a lot in terms of getting equipment to the school. And what are your thoughts on just building, number one, I suppose, building that Jeppe rowing community, and secondly, just helping, having the community help build the equipment for the school?
Yeah, I think the major thing that I liked when I saw the Boats and Blades thing initially, and it was one of the things like a lot of people, I don't know how much you know of South Africa, like within the South African rowing community, but a lot of people said like the Jeppe Boats and Blades thing is actually a great model for almost all rowing schools, even like St. John's, Saints, St. Benedict's. It's a very good model in terms of how to raise money in like a more cost-effective way, if you can say such a thing in rowing, because it's so expensive. But because generally what used to happen, like I remember when we bought Kitty Hawk in 2010, they were trying to get the money for years and years. But the difficulty was when people, like one of the big misgivings that people have, like I've noticed this at every school that I've gone to, is that when people, a lot of, especially ex-rowers, they're reluctant to donate the money to the school like directly, because they always say, no, I don't know. Like if they don't get like if the boat doesn't show up immediately, then they're like, no, they've just taken the money and they've spent it somewhere else. Whereas with the Boats and Blades thing, it was like, especially the way that they do that chart that they color in. So you can almost see like, okay, I put in, so if an old boy puts in like 50K, he immediately sees, okay, a quarter of the boat's been colored in. And then people are like, okay, it's going to take another 10K to get the boat bought, like to order it. So then the money like really comes in quite quickly after that, because there's people putting in 1,000 Rand here, 500 Rand there, whatever they can donate. And then that boat actually, it also becomes more of a case like when we bought Kitty Hawk. The reason it's named Kitty Hawk is because that's the name of the lady who paid. I think she paid 200 of the 250,000 rand for the boat. So it also gives, I think, a lot more ownership of the boat to the whole rowing community versus like, oh yeah, it's just something you need to have like one or two rich people around to just sort of give you the money.
Absolutely.
I think also, yeah. And I think also from the school side, just from what I've just generally with schools, it's quite difficult for schools to make the major investment in rowing because I don't know how many guys are currently rowing at Jeppe.
The current numbers is just on 50 guys. Just on 50.
So one of the big things that I've like realized, especially being an MIC here at SACS, is that you kind of have a much more realistic understanding of where the school is in relation to rowing, because a lot of people look at rowing like you look at Saints, St. Albans, St. John's, the private schools, because their schools are so well financed, the school can afford to invest in the equipment. But if you look at their numbers relative to how many kids are in the school, rowing is actually a much bigger sport than at Jeppe. There's, I think, 900 to 1,000 kids at any time, and you've got 50 guys rowing. Like when you're a kid, you don't really understand. Like 5 out of 100 guys in the school rows. Like you 95.
Cost per head.
If you talk to any kid, if you talk to 100 people, 9.5 of them aren't going to row. So it's like it's much easier to understand. But then when you have people who can fund like your equipment and stuff, it allows you to use the money that you have from the school. I remember one of our coaches used to always say this, that in other sports, the money gets spent on the kids. So like in rugby, the money, because the fields and everything's already taken care of, all the money is actually pumped directly into coaches, like stuff that's going to directly affect you. Whereas in rowing, a lot of our money just goes into things like now that I've picked up all these things you've got to pay for, like paying insurance, paying your VLC memberships, paying your shed rental. Like I don't know how long I remember because when I was in second year open, only in the second half of the season as well, we were the first group, and I don't know how long it had been gone for, but we never used to pay rowing levies. Like it wasn't a thing for us. So that's also what I think was really nice at Jeppe. I think that's the one thing that I would say, I wrote it down when you sent me the questions initially, was that a big part of raising money is not just raising money for equipment, but also to make sure that the sport is something like, I think for me, that's one of the big reasons I kept rowing, was it was never like, you used to pay for your tours and stuff, but that was with every sport. And then anyone would come and try rowing because it wasn't like the sport that you can only do if you can like afford it and stuff. So we had a lot of different guys from various different backgrounds, and that also made it a lot more interesting. You weren't rowing with 7 guys who went to the same primary school as you, whose parents do similar jobs to your parents. It was very different. We had guys who used to, like me and my one friend, because we lived fairly close, we would walk to training. And then the other guys would drive in from Edenvale. And then we had one guy who used to drive from really far. So when we had morning training, he'd have to stay at somebody's house. And like, yeah, it was a much more like, I think it was a very diverse experience compared to what I've encountered in some other clubs. I think St. Benedict's was slightly different because there's just, I think when I was there was 100 kids rowing in a school of 400 boys. So that's like 1 in every 4 kids rowing, 1 in every 5. So because of that, it's also quite diverse and you can bring in a lot of guys. Whereas here at SACS, one of the big major things that I've noticed and I've been working with is just trying to make sure that anyone who comes to rowing, one of the big things in rowing is you need to have someone who you look at and you're like, oh, that person's just like me. Like if they can do it, then I can do it. And then I think that helps a hell of a lot. So yeah, I would say if there's one thing I'd suggest, or just to put out there to the old boys in general, it's not just about getting the club new equipment. Like if you don't feel like that's something, you can also contribute in other ways, like helping pay for tours, helping, like I think that's what helps. If you look at like what I've come across a lot here in the Western Cape is that the rugby is a huge deal here and it's super professional, it's super well funded, but it's not the schools that are pumping in the money. What they have is old boys and stuff who benefited like massively from rugby. They want other kids to have those experiences. Yeah. So they pay for flights, they pay for tours, they pay for better coaching. If they need to get a specialist in, they go find those people. And the old boys are happy to put that in because they know like this is going to make it a better experience for these guys. Yeah,
absolutely. And so I mean we have a couple of initiatives. So in terms of Jeppe Boats and Blades, it is about the equipment, but Jeppe Rowing as a club really are involved both within the school but with extramural activities as well to fund the club itself. And you know the way Jeppe Boats and Blades views this is that you know we can take on the responsibility of the equipment, so that the club itself doesn't have to worry about that part of it, because it's a major expense. You know, and trying to raise funds for a boat, you know, could take you 2-3 years. Whereas the mechanisms that we have that we now have in place means that happens a lot quicker, which is fantastic. And it's really thanks to the Jeppe community, to the old boys that have been so generous. And you know, so it's not about, oh, look what Boats and Blades have done. No, it's about what the community has done, and this is great. So JBB acts as almost like just a conduit to direct that funding. So in terms of your experiences as a Jeppe Oarsman, is there one particular incident that you can think about that you'd like to share with us?
There's a few. I was thinking about this when I saw the question, and I thought there's a few that I could think of. I think in terms of, there's a few different ones. I think during my first blade lift, that was definitely a special experience, because you sit and you watch the guys do it for years. You're not even allowed to carry your sculling blades on your shoulder. And then you wait till under 16 and you'll just do anything. And like, once you can do it, it's a special thing. And I don't think haven't found any club with a similar tradition to that one. And then also once we found out the history and stuff behind it, so that was pretty special. But I think the experience that definitely stands out to me personally was our 2014 January camp. So I don't know if the guys still go to Orkney for camps, but yeah, when we used to go to Orkney, it was always, it's like Orkney itself. You'll only appreciate it once you go to other rowing camp venues. Like, you stay in a tent, but the food is unbelievable, because Saints came in that camp with us, and Stillians had come with us on that camp because their coach was looking for like a quiet venue with a long stretch of water. And that's exactly what Orkney is. It's dead straight, basically. This is the crux of the story. No one actually knew how long that stretch was. Like, the different crews had rowed to like different points, so they knew the other markers. Like the 2012 guys rowed, they said 30 Ks, and then they had their own like marker. They said it was like a water pump house that's just after the second bridge. So then we got on for the session, and we didn't know how far we were going. So we got on, it was the normal time, like 5:36, and our coaches were in the same motorboat and us in the Saints 8. So we just warmed up together, and we knew we were going to do a long steady. So we had gotten started, and then we were rowing, and then we went past the second bridge, and then we were like, okay, we looked at the coaches, nothing was said. Then we kept on rowing, and then we passed the so-called 15K marker. That's what one of the guys in our crew had been in that crew. So he was like, okay, Alex, this is 15Ks. This is getting serious.
Yeah.
And then we passed that, and then the coach said, okay, guys, we're going to carry on for another 30 minutes. And we weren't really sure how long we'd been rowing, because we only stopped at the first bridge. That was our only stop, to finish the warm-up, take off kit, and then carry on. And then we kept rowing, and then we got to a point, and then we heard this like weird sound getting closer and closer behind us. And it was actually rapids. So we ended up rowing. It was 21 Ks. And Tomo was coaching us at that stage. And he told us, like, as far as he knew, no one had ever actually found the end of the stretch. So that was pretty cool, I thought. So we found the end of the stretch, and then we stopped there. We had ate quite a bit of food, drank quite a bit of water, and then we turned around, and then it dawned on us that we've just rode 21 Ks.
You gotta go back.
And I was going to ride 21 Ks back. And I remember none of us made it to the table for breakfast. We literally put our boats down, and we sat down right where we left our boats, and we were eating we sat in like a circle with like 2 foam rollers, and we were sitting there foam rolling and eating, and we got the coxes to bring us food because we had been rowing for like, I think it was like 3.5, 4 hours.
Wow,
and I remember that was amazing. That was like, it was so nuts because we rode basically, I don't think we would have been able to do it by ourselves, but it also just was like how amazing the venue was. And I remember the Saints guys, that for me epitomized the whole Jeppe like rowing experience, like how nice it is. Because some of the stuff we did, like when we'd come off the water, they said like when they used to come off the water in the evening, it was just like, okay, the first eight's done, they're gonna take their boat off and go in, whereas we'd have the war cries. And like I think for them it was like a very different like view of rowing. Like if you were in the first 8 at Jeppe, it didn't matter how well or how badly your 8 was doing, you were the top 8 rowers in the club, so you used to get treated like a world-class athlete. You were like a celebrity basically at that camp. And yeah, it was always amazing to come in from sessions and call for the juniors and then have the war cries as you came in. Like that's, yeah, I still get chills when I think of that stuff.
Amazing. Brilliant stuff. Well, Muhammad, thanks so much for your time. It's really great speaking to you. And I know that you've been working with Terry as well in terms of the book and just providing him with more just not just factual information, but the stories behind, the story behind the story. Yeah. So thank you very much for that. We really do appreciate it. Yeah, and when that book does come out, it'll make a big difference.
Yeah, that'll be. I always thought. Yeah, I think Jeppe rowing, especially that book, will be. I think it'll be a great book just in general for South African rowing. I think there's a few more books that have come out in the last few years. That book by Alex Cruikshanks. And there's also another book by Danny Britton, who was the team doctor for the national squad. And I think those books, it like creates those stories around South African rowing to like explain like how special it is and things like that. Because you find out like, oh, this is where this school plays a role and this is where that school fits in. Like, I think if you ask most of the Jeppe kids now, like who's the Ridderplaat course named after, they won't know. But if you like, I remember once you like, because I remember Alan Francis was kind of around when I started rowing, and just to know that the guy who started your rowing club, like he literally built the rowing course that we all raced on.
Yeah,
and
he did. Yeah.
Train on that stretch of border, like they've put in the lanes. And I think people realize how much work must have gone into doing that. Like to put in an 8-lane course. Like rowing has exclusive rights to row year round there. I think that's like, I think if Jeppe rowing doesn't make another contribution to South African rowing, that alone is like one of the biggest contributions that I think someone involved with Jeppe has made. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, again, thanks for your time, and for everybody else out there. There's a lot of good things happening. We just had Gauteng champs. Jeppe did really well in that. There's the club's growing. The quality of the oarsmen is significant. We've got great coaches. We've got a very switched on director of rowing, and there's so many good things happening at Jeppe rowing at the moment. And the fact that the community is involved with that, and Muhammad, you saw that yourself on Gauteng champs and the WhatsApp group. There's a lot of correspondence and a lot of things happening, and that's really, really exciting. So thank you for that.
Yeah, it's been great. It's actually been so cool to see, because there's always been like a smaller community, but it's mostly people who are like directly involved because their kids were rowing or their brother was rowing, whereas now it's a lot more of like the wider community. It's like Old Boys You Rowed, who are still like, for example, me and Tato are coaching at different schools, but we still like aware of what. It's so nice to be able to stay actually like in the loop of what's actually happening in your club. So it has been really cool.
Cheers, man. Wow,
keep it
thanks.
up.
Yeah, thanks. No, you certainly will. Thanks for that.
Great to have that when we were at school.
Yeah.
It would have been great to run a brand new 8 with some new blades. Those guys must definitely enjoy that.
Of course.
The feeling to run a new bike.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. So thanks, man.